We're going to have a little fun today um, with the topic on the many varieties of emptiness. How does the different sect of Buddhism treats the uh, idea of emptiness? Now, in the West, we encounter with a lot of wrong perceptions about what Buddhism and Zen is. So you hear Buddhist teachers or Zen teachers say, don't stop reading, stop thinking, stop debating. Matter of fact, the training of a Zen teacher or a Buddhist teacher in Asia requires many, many years of philosophical studies. So we have different terms for people who are expert scholars in this area, which most of the monastics, including Zen teachers, are in the East are trained in this discipline. We call the teachers of the dharma dharma masters, fatsu, which is the word dharma also means laws. So the teachers of natural laws that Buddhism, the many concepts of Buddhism is founded on. And the Zen teachers called Tingsu is the application of those laws, those dharmas, those teachings. And often there's a ongoing and interesting debates, dialectics into these things. And many of my students will find that when they start to practice koan, unbeknownst to them, they start to fall into this experience as well. And they thought, well, I thought Zen is not about debates. Well, surprise, surprise, it's called Dharma combat. What are we debating? We're debating laws. Naturally, people like, my teacher who was a law student found it very attractive to be in the Zen practice. So I call the exercise in today's talk, much ado about nothing. Which is exactly what has been happening over the centuries, right? Among Buddhist scholars and philosophers. So we will examine the many varieties of much ado about nothing into emptiness that they had looked at. Before we get into it, I'm going to cover some basic terms for people who don't or has been very familiar with these terminologies. Which I find that Buddhism is a study in covers a part of the metaphysics, which is a branch of philosophy that deals with the first principles, things like concepts such as kind of being, known, substance, causation, time, space, basically all the studies that cannot be done through material reality. We can't really quantify a lot of these things, although some scientists disagrees. And ontology is a branch of metaphysics which is concerned with the nature and relations of things, and particularly a theory about the natures of different kinds of things and the beliefs and experiences that are surrounding it. So, say, for example, a school of social constructionism that how the world is constructed through social aspects. And then we also will cover a bit of philosophical epistemology, which is a study of nature and origin and limits of human knowledge, how we come to know things. And, how do we know what we know, and can we really know what we know? Okay, it gets a little bit thick, but that's one of my favorite things, because that is the abundance of the Zen practice. So, how does the different sect of Buddhism is treating emptiness? You don't hear a lot of people talk about emptiness in early Buddhism. which one of the major forms that survived is the Theravada Buddhism from the early Buddhism. So, but emptiness in the Buddhist text is synonymous with nirvana. Basically, all dharma, which is all the phenomena in existence, are treated as conditioned or unconditioned. So the conditioned dharma, of course, it's subject to time and space and object to kind of reality, and the unconditioned is beyond time and space. So one of the schools of Buddhism, the early Buddhist schools, the Sarvastivadin, treated that our dharmas are real. Basically, it has very persistent existence, which explains the phenomena of memory of past mental events, karmic conditioning, effectiveness of past actions now taking place in the present, and the ability for us to cognize objects and anticipating future events, things like that. So the Sarvastivadin see all dharmas as real. I basically, we can transform, we can reprogram them, we can change them, we can interact with them, but they're inherently real. And the Theravadins say, well, no. Most of it is not real. Most dharmas are radically impermanent. So it's not real. It comes and goes. So it doesn't have any intrinsic, independence on its own. Basically, it's produced by other karmas and it's produced by other things. So in a chain that kind of like causes one causes the other. But they do still believe that momentary dharma is real. Basically, now we call it an atomic event. That are the basically fundamental constituents of everything. So momentary dharma is real. It's like, this cup that I'm holding, right? It's real. It seems to be here. The memory of the cup is not real. The projected future kind of idea of the cup is not real, but momentary realness is that it's actually here. I'm holding it. Hey, it exists, right? So coming down to further than that, it's the fundamental creations of everything, the smallest particles that we can reduce it down to the smallest time frame, and it's coming and going, because in Buddhism, when you do meditation, you're going to be able to observe the coming and going of dharmas, the coming and going of mental objects and everything. Well, when it comes and when it goes, maybe at that point it's not real, but in the moment that it exists, it's real. So the Theravada see that as very real. So most things are not real because they're radically impermanent, but there are some things that are real because in that moment it exists. Okay, so when we get to the 1st century, there's a huge departure from that with the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, which, we get the Cliff Note version, which is a hard sutra that we read every time we sit down to have a Zen meeting, and before we meditate. That's the Cliff Note version of the Prajnaparamita Sutra that was kind of appeared around the 1st century. So because of the advent of this sutra, it started to kind of diverge from Theravada Buddhism in a great way. Why? Nagarjuna is probably regarded as the greatest philosopher that has probably the best interpretations of emptiness. He postulates that all things are empty of intrinsic existence. So he's saying, this cup is made from things that are not cupness. For example, this metal piece, the molding, the plastic, you break it all down, the cup really has no existence because it's made out of all these things that are not cupness. Right? Mugness or whatever. And so we have this idea of this mug. We have this idea of this mug because conventional kind of truth is that this mug exists, right? Because it's in my hand, I'm holding it. But the absolute truth is it doesn't exist, because why? It's made of all things that are not cupness, and if you break it down to the smallest minute particles of everything that makes up this, mugness, it involves, all these other things that puts together to have this idea that we have in our mind and this label called the coffee mug. Right? But of course, you can drink tea and all kinds of stuff with this. It's not just a coffee mug. So Nagarjuna looks at this in that way, and he says, well, everything is composed of everything else, right? There's no independent existence of anything. You can't autonomously define anything as being a thing in itself. You can't. So human beings, we're a process. We're composed of non-human aspects, and everything that you find in reality, that you can discover in reality, that you put a label on, it's composed of many different aspects that is put together for a concept that we called, whatever it is we call it. Like a chariot is composed of wheels and axles and all these different things, the platforms, horse, and wood that makes up a metal, all these parts that comes together to form what you call a chariot. But a chariot in itself, it has temporary existence, and it actually doesn't have an existence because it's composed of all things which dependently gives its manifestation. So the ultimate truth, according to the Nagarjuna, is that everything is dependently originated. It got causes constructed from other stuff. The ultimate truth is there is no ultimate truth. So that's his version of emptiness, right? All things, including emptiness itself, which is the idea and the concept, by the way, because when you look at emptiness, right, you look at it, this thing is empty. Well, it's got to be full of something in order to be empty, right? So Nagarjuna says the whole idea of emptiness itself is empty because, you're looking at a relative construct, okay? So everything is name only. All these are simple conventions that we go about constructing our reality. So Nagarjuna declares nirvana to be identical with samsara, that is, the conditioned world and the conventional existing world is basically the same. While this is a huge departure from Theravadan Buddhism and the earlier Buddhist schools, which looks at the condition and the non-condition, right? And Nagarjuna says, well, there's no condition and non-condition. There is, in fact, the intrinsic nature of everything is empty, and that's it. That's all you're seeing. You're seeing, emptiness everywhere. And even emptiness itself as a concept, well, it doesn't exist either. So is this ontological nihilism? No. It's not nihilistic, because emptiness means that entity exists without intrinsic existence. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but that they do not exist. Kind of like, we have this debate about existence and non-existence. Well, Nagarjuna negates both of that. He says you can't take the stance of, and some things being in existence because you take the components of something apart, and kind of it exists because it doesn't exist. It exists same time as it doesn't exist. So it's not ontological nihilism. It's basically between those two, and it's above those two, right? And this is the same debate that we saw that movie about Bodhidharma when he comes to China, and one of the kind of famous scholar monks came to see him and says everything is empty of existence, empty of self-nature, empty of everything. And Buddha Dharma just punches him in the face because he's stuck in the view that nothing exists. But when you get punched in the face, obviously something exists. Right? So that's the mistake with people when they study Buddhism and when they study Zen, and they're caught in what I call the trap of emptiness. Right? Because they go home and everything's empty. Why the heck do I do anything for? Well, it's empty and it's not at the same time, right? So is this ontological constructivism, like many Western scholar argues, which means that we kind of, construct all of these and well, no. We're the Mahayamakis, Nagarjuna schools talk about the influence of karma on the way the world is constructed, but he's not he's not saying that it impacts on social conditionings and everything. He's saying we are constructing the world, okay, out of things that have no intrinsic existence. So what he's saying is you can't conceptualize and formulate any of this in your head, because it's all contextual and relative, right? So how we see the world in our society today is relative, been very different from how people see the world maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So he goes further than social constructivism. He rejects all the conventional conceptual knowledge and views, and he says, well, you attach to any view whether something exists or something doesn't exist, it's wrong. Okay, so so don't bother. Because even views itself are empty. So the theoretical understanding of emptiness is wrong. Why? Because when you look at the goal of Buddhism and all these great thinkers of Buddhism, they're not debating for the heck of debating. Their goal is what? To transform this knowledge into a direct experience in meditation. Because all of these great philosophers of Buddhism are not just scholars, they're meditators. Okay? They arrive through a lot of their explanations through their own personal experience. So they're not, the Mahayamikas are not doing ontology or philosophy, they are practical. It's the end of suffering, stupid. That's what they're saying. Which brings us to my favorite school of Buddhist, I call it psychology and philosophy, the Yogacara school, which is founded by a Sangha and his brother Vasubandhu, who are students of Maitreya in the 4th century. So they further developed on Mahayamika's foundations of Nagarjuna's teachings in the 1st century. So they look at it and they say, well, emptiness, everything is dependent on one another. But they went a little bit further. They said emptiness is dependently originating in the process that happens in our head or happens in consciousness, okay? Basically, emptiness is empty of duality of grasping subject and object. Well, that's where Nagarjuna kind of stops at, right? He doesn't really go into that as much as the Yogacara school. So the Yogacara school says we have this consciousness stream in our head that lacks any intrinsic existence because, well, consciousness is the agency that fabricates all of our experiences of the world of external things, and our awareness creates the illusion of reality and knowledge. I remember in my mid-20s, I was on a bus with a friend. And I started mulling over this. So I was studying Yogacara at that time. And, I kind of question out loud to him. I said, what happens to reality if I take a hammer and hit over your head? The world just disappears for you, right? It's gone. Does it independently exist, or does it exist because you know it? Because you have consciousness to be able to perceive it. And he looks at me and goes, oh. This kind of question is enough to scare people, right? Because all of their reality, every one of our reality is constructed on this very thing, right? And, as I was mulling over this question and doing all my interpretations of, I was on the bus going home, he followed me home just to hear the rest of the thing. If you think Zen teachers, or Zen practitioner, at some point they don't engage in these dialectics, they do. Why? Because it strikes at the heart of Zen, this inquiry, right? This questioning. So Vansu Habasu declares in the Yogacara writings that the external world is only perception or cognition. Consciousness manifests as non-existent objects. When we dream, what part of the dream is real? This is where most of the Zen teachings are, kind of is constructed around. The dreamer constructs the dream. There's no material divisible entity or the indivisible atom that can be known. Basically, if without the dreamer, nothing exists in the dream. So when you wake up from a dream, what the heck exists, right? You're like, oh, the dog's so cute. So this is where you get all the teachings of Zen of, reality, life is a dream, and also the Chinese philosopher Huang Chu, dream of the butterfly, right? is the dreamer, the dreamer the person dreaming, or the butterfly? Am I the butterfly that dreams of the person dreaming, or the dreamer is the one who dreamt of being a butterfly? These questions just gets your head spinning. Okay. So the Yogacara school has, kind of categorized three aspects of nature that can be experienced. The constructed conventional world with subject and object duality. This is the experience of unawakened people. It's imagined. This constructed world is imagined. People think that everything exists, but it's all a fabric of your cognitive process. It's basically, your brain hallucinates reality. That's what he's saying, right? And that's the, that your brain just hallucinates this dream that you live in. And the unawakened person is completely immersed in this. And then the second aspect of nature, of reality, is dependent origination. Yeah. So the stream of consciousness of cognitive events is always in a state of flux. It's constructed on dependent aspects of one thing after another. If you remove all of those dependent aspects, then you get this non-dual element that remains. Because everything that has a permanent, temporary existence is constructed on something that it depends on before. So a temporary comes into being, and then it goes out of being, and it comes into being, it goes out of being. And the state of all mental perception is inherently the same. It's constantly in a state of flux, which kind of has to be continuously coming and going in order to create a perception of reality. But the problem is this kind of process happens so fast that for the average unawakened mind, unexamined mind, they can't see it. And this is the whole process of Zen meditation, is to be able to slow down everything so we can see it. Okay. The perfected aspect of reality is what is realized when awakening occurs, when all consciously constructed aspects of how we create the dream is empty. Basically, the Yogacarara's version of emptiness is that when you understand all of these, I call it constructed reality or cognitive events that constructs your reality, are devoid of any reality at all, which are all kind of conceptual fabrication of the mind. Your mind hallucinates your reality and superimposes it on the non-dual stream of knowing. So there's a non-dual stream of knowing, but your mind superimposes it on it. So the awakened person sees the absence of the imagined aspect in the whole thing. So they see the cognition process, the flow of all these cognition process, all these types of knowing, all these conceptual realities. They see through it, and they know its process. They know how it rises. They know how it is conditioned on other things, which is not in itself like that. And they see through the whole thing, and they also realize the part that forms the basis of all of those kind of coming and going of the cognitive process. So emptiness for the Yogacarans is empty of duality, empty of grasping of subject-object consciousness. Because no object exists outside of consciousness, as the dream doesn't exist outside of the dreamer. Many people say, well, is this the same as Berkeley's view that the mind is thinking substance, ideas, and sensory image, is kind of its quality? Well, the Yogacara looks at it and goes, oh, it's casually conditioned series of mental events. Is it ontological idealism that nothing exists outside of consciousness? I mean, the Western people misunderstand. A lot of Western scholars misunderstand the Yogacarara's teachings. I find it because I guess there's not enough translation of those texts. But it's Yogacara is not proposing that there's not a real reality outside of whatever we superimpose on. There is. The problem is we're not capable of really perceiving it, because everything that we know is constructed by mind. So it's not ontological idealism, because God doesn't coordinate the experience of individuals and ensure orders and regularities with our perceptions, as Berkeley says. Okay. No. Well, there's a problem with the shared experience and perceptions. How do my pink color, and your pink color, we both identify something as pink, or me and you identify this as kind of like the singing bowl. We identify this as the mouse. At least we can agree on this is black. So what about that shared reality? If we're all kind of projecting and superimposing our conceptual kind of mind flowing process onto reality, how come we have shared reality of these things? We live in a world where we experience things, and we experience other people, and other people experience us. Well, the Yogacarara's explanation to this is that, as you know, the Yogacara talks about the collective unconscious and the individual unconscious, and in all of those, there are what you call seeds, karmic seeds that gets matured, and then at the subconscious level influence how we perceive the world. So as a result of maturation of these karmic seeds, kind of a conditioning of the mind, of their individual consciousness, we experience this shared hallucination. Like dogs will experience kind of generally, the world as being colorless compared to the human beings. We see, kind of like a spectrum of color. And bats will see things differently, and birds will see things differently. Why? Because of the karmic seeds conditioning that has been matured, for, I call the machinations of the mind of specific entities based on karma that forms, I call that shared hallucinating experience. Okay. So we have another problem. Well, if we have no first-hand experience of any reality, what about other people? Well, the funny thing is, other people are also objects of your hallucination. Right? They kind of exist and they kind of don't, because you superimpose all these concepts of who they are onto the experience of other people. Okay. So multiple consciousness themselves are a feature of conventional dualistic imagined world and not how they really are. And that's the positions of the Yogacharan philosopher of the 11th century, Ratnakiri. Are the Yogacharans looking at ontology? Not really. They're not saying that the external world doesn't exist, but they're saying we cannot know them with the unawakened mind. Because the unawakened mind projects everything. Everything we see is distorted. So it's more epistemology. So before awakening, we are incapable of distinguishing our mental construction and interpretation of the world from the world itself. So this goes back to the Zen practice. It sounds familiar with the Zen practice that I've been talking with you for the longest time. Well, it's based on the Yogacara studies. Yogacara is said to be probably one of the most comprehensive Buddhist schools that looks into the nature of reality and mind. Influence a lot of many of the Mahayana schools of Buddhism, including Zen. So we looked at all these various ways that Buddhist schools look at the aspect of emptiness. And then we looked at the practice, realizing emptiness in Zen. Well, there's a misconception that Zen practitioners don't engage in these discussions. For example, I'll bring you back to the story of the Bodhidharma of Fu Nang that I told some time ago. Very famous story, which probably all Zen practitioner knows. When he walked after his awakening, he went to the mountains and lived there with the hunters for a long time. And when he came down to the cities again, he walked by a temple. And he saw two monks engaging in debates, looking at the flag that flies in front of the temple. One person says, well, it's in the flag's nature to be able to move. That's why the wind can move it. So it's the flag that moves. And the other monk says, no. The flag itself doesn't have the ability to move. It depends on the wind in order for it to move it. So is that a philosophical debate? It looks like it. Right? And Bodhidharma, Hu Nang walks past and he looks at them and he says, no, none of those things are moving. It's your mind moving. So you see, Zen is very much founded on the foundations of what I've just covered. Okay. So then we looked at the central teachings of Zen, which is Buddha nature. When people say, well, yeah, Zen is a teaching independent outside of the scriptures. They're wrong, and in some ways right, but wrong, because all the aspects of the Zen practice is founded on the scriptures. The problem is people get too attached to the concepts of the scriptures. They're not really experiencing the experience of the practice itself. So basically, you're too attached to reading the menu and the I call it the cookbook instead of cooking it for yourself, right? In order to eat it. That's a simple way of looking at it. Is you look at all these scholars, and this is one of the probably biggest mistake that a lot of Buddhist practitioners get into, including Vietnamese practitioner. Most of them thinks that studying Buddhism theoretically, knowledge, the books and everything, that's practicing Buddhism. No, it's wrong. You're just reading the cookbook. You're not really learning how to cook yourself or actually producing the food that can be, consumed. So, so if you want to read the cookbook, you can, or you're welcome to do so. But I did it for 13 years, so exercise in futility. Okay, so the Zen practice is highly dependent on the realization of Buddha nature, and Buddha nature in the Mahayana text is called Taga Garba. It means he who thus come or thus gone. It's got 4 perfections of quality, which is loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. It is bliss, purity, and well, maybe kind of a similar idea like Atman, kind of eternal selfhood. But the problem is most people mistaken the eternal selfhood as a personal eternal self, right? Or a entity that somehow is involved in human affairs or the affairs of the world, like God or Brahman. No, God doesn't care about your suffering. There's no great beings out there that cares if your little pains or whatever, because don't bother praying, because this awareness is impersonal. Doesn't care about any of the concerns of human beings or anything. And so people are mistaken, okay, this Buddha nature or the idea of Atman or God, all of that, or the same as Tao, the Tao of Taoism. So it doesn't relate all of Zen practice, okay? Doesn't care about being or non-being. We are looking at experience both, but transcending both. It's beyond description and only can be realized with the awakening, a glimpse into the emptiness experience, which is philosophical and conceptually impossible to grasp. So that's why a lot of Zen teachers are saying, don't bother reading, waste your time and debating it. It's not an intellectual theoretical exercise. Get on your cushion. Why? Because at the end of the day, all of these points of views, all of these different ways of approaching it philosophically are like the story of blind men feeling the elephant. That story comes from Buddhism, right? So, the guy who fills up the trunk says, well, the elephant looks like a hose, a really big hose. The guy who fills the feet, well, the elephant looks like a stomp, kind of like a hunk kind of thing. And the guy who feels the elephant up by the tail says, well, it looks like kind of a brush. Are all these views valid? Yes and no, because it's not the elephant in itself. It does describe the elephant, but it's not the elephant in itself. So when we engage in these philosophical and ontological and metaphysics, the epistemology debates, we're looking at the different aspects of the elephant. Well, the Zen practice is, wait a minute, why are we doing all of this? It's the end of suffering, stupid. It all comes down to that, right? It's the experience itself, and that's why um, Zen teachers in the East, even though they're very highly educated, they've been reading a lot of books, but they're not telling you to do so. Why? Because unless they're training you to be another Zen teacher, there's no point. No point to do it, right? They really want you to experience the experience itself. Uh, so why engage in all of this? Why? We have a saying in Vietnamese: if you study, uh, knowledge and you don't practice, you're like a bag of books walking around. You're nothing more than an encyclopedia, right? If you practice and you don't study, well, you are a blind man walking at night, because you're going to fall into traps and holes and all kinds of things that people are stuck in their views that are covered by all these theoretical knowledge, that happened with your predecessors. And you never know that you fell into them. Why? Because you don't have any knowledge of them, right? So that's why when I began the Zen teachings in the beginner's class, I said, knowledge is a map, right? But if you have your face in the map, you're not going anywhere, right? So you study knowledge for the heck of putting it down and doing what you're doing, which is the meditation, the experience itself. And when you encounter experiences that are kind of pointers, you pick up the map and you go, okay, where am I? Okay, so I saw that tree. Okay, that's where I am, right? And then you put the map down and you keep going. That's the use of knowledge. That's the use of Buddhist studies. The problem is people do this. Right? You can't go anywhere. You can't drive if you're always looking at the map, right? You drive into a tree or something. But or better yet, you get series. Who's telling you where to turn? I call the Zen teacher the version of the series. Turn here in 100 meters. so Zen teachers need to know the map very well. Why? Because if they don't know the map, how do they know they have traversed the map and got to where they got, or how far they're going? Or are they even leading their students to the right direction? We can't be so egotistic that we think that we're doing everything right. Matter of fact, it's the opposite, right? So in my early years of studying Buddhism, my teacher threw at me 3 cases of books. Drove me nuts. I love books, right? And when I'm thrown with hundreds of books, I went wild. After a while, I realized that this is not Buddhism. This is just the knowledge of Buddhism, and it's the experience itself that matters. Well, with all these theoretical knowledge, I started saying, well, it comes down to the practice. You have to put them all down and just go. Because if you don't put them down, you don't go anywhere. Okay? But they have their good uses. So or exercise and much ado about nothing gives you the extent of, I mean, I could call it a very rough, okay, picture, an overview of how liberation is arrived at. And there's many ways of looking at emptiness. But at the same time, at the end of the day, realizing emptiness is nirvana, is liberation. So I'm going to go open up for questions. I think I went over time a little bit. This is a heavy subject, which students of philosophy probably appreciate, and the rest of you are probably going, Okay, any questions?
It's John here.
Hi, John.
At this point, I think I am too full of thinking to think of a question, but I'd just like to say that was very valuable. That was a ton of very valuable insights in that talk for me. That was just great. I loved all those analogies. It made perfect sense to me about being, either your face in the map or having the experience and not knowing where you're going. That's terrific. So thank you very much for that. I found this talk very enlightening in and of itself.
Thank you. Once in a while, I thought just let my nerdy side come out.
It was fabulous. It was just fabulous.
Thank you very much. So
yes.
Unfortunately, we have to leave today. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Take care. So, as I said, it all brings back to the personal experience of observing, studying our own reality. All of these different ways of looking at the road to liberation, the final liberation, is arrived at from the various schools of Buddhism and philosophers in those schools, who are themselves meditators. So they didn't come through with all of this from thinking. The biggest problem with, I would call it the practice and study of Buddhism, is that when we're beginners, we look at Buddhism as a way to deal with our anxiety, deal with our suffering. I call it acute suffering and anxiety. And after a while, some of that will be kind of assuaged. A lot of people are happy and comfortable with that. So I've reduced my suffering a little bit. I'll leave, go back to my regular kind of hallucinatory life. I call it hallucinatory life. And some people like me are not really able to contend with what I know. After a little bit of Buddhism practice, because I know there's more there. So then we engage in deeper study of Buddhism and experiences. And without these conceptual maps, very hard to do so. You can get lost, because the higher, the more progressive your practice, the more pitfalls happens on the way. And without good, solid knowledge of the map, people step into all kinds of pitfalls. And I've seen this with the advent of Buddhism in the West, because at first there was a lot of lacking of the textual part. Or there's a big divide between just people who studying it, the academics, and people who are practicing it, the actual practitioner. The practitioner takes a point of, not really going to go into a lot of studying. I'm just going to practice it. And the academics look at it and go, I can't practice it because I lose my objectivity. Well, does a researcher into medicine for curing cancer, will he take that medicine if he has cancer? right. And Buddhism is not just a religion. It's a religion to some people, but it's a whole set of practices that helps people, helps us to deal with not just our everyday lives, everyday anxiety, suffering, everyday reality. Okay? That is, I call unsatisfactory dukkha. Buddhism is not just that. It's more than that. Okay? In order to truly overcome all of that, we have to get into all these experiences. And all these experiences encompasses all the questions that people have asked since time immemorial till now. What is the nature of reality? How is the world perceived? How do we know about knowledge? How do we see the world? And how we come to know about things. So for me, I find that there needs to be a balance of both. The practice and the questioning itself. Because we have so many assumptions. Yes. Patricia, you want to say something? Sorry, unmute.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. Thank you. It was really, really fascinating to listen to you. I had a couple of questions I jotted down. One of the things is I always so we talk about how we have this diluted way of looking at things that seems so real to us. Like what I'm sure when people ask the question, why the heck would we be made like this? Like, it just doesn't make sense. Why aren't we made seeing the world the way it really is? Like why are we made so completely convinced of this delusion? It just, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. Like,
well, if you ask the Buddha that question, he answers in a very successful way. Okay, he says, when somebody shoots you an arrow and it hits you, are you going to stop and ask where does the arrow come from, or the first thing you're going to do is try to pull that arrow out? And he says, he says the why doesn't help.
Yeah.
The how does.
Yeah.
So you see, Buddhism doesn't ponder so much in the why as to how things are constructed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And how are we going to get out of that? So all these discussion and emptiness, you're looking at it, nothing in Buddhism is going to tell you about how things started. Because the Buddha takes a stand, it's not helpful. And that's when somebody asks him that, he remains silent a lot of times. He says it's not helpful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
This whole, kind of like much ado about nothing. They're not doing it for the fun of it. They're doing it for the practice. It's all the how things are turning out this way. How are they created? How are they manifesting? How are they coming? How is it happening, going on? And how do we get out of this?
But not why. Yeah.
So you're not going to get the why from Buddhism.
Okay.
Anybody who wants to talk about the why is wasting their time. That's the Buddha's kind of way of looking at things. Because while you're talking about the why, The how is happening, and
Mhm.
you're stuck in it.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So I call it a very practical philosophy, and you can apply immediately.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
So sorry, I can't answer that question.
Well, I just thought you were just going to answer it, right? Yeah. Um, so another thing that really came up when you were talking was, and it was just sort of at the end of the talk where you said, okay, so kind of with a realization of emptiness, then you have a realization of Buddha nature, which had those four qualities. So, but you said it's not God, and it's not some sort of concept that's kind of looking after us and guiding us with this compassion. So my question is, like, then where does Buddha nature exist? Is it in people? Is it in all living beings? Is it out there? Like, I mean, what is it like? And also, like, how can you be so sure that this concept, whatever it is good? Like, that it has these positive, is that just the experience that one gets when one's enlightened, that you know that it has these positive aspects? But then you said that, like, God doesn't care, but if this, whatever it is, Buddha nature is so compassionate, like, does it care, and why doesn't it care? I don't know. I'm really confused on Buddha nature, obviously.
Buddha nature is the very foundation, and all things are constructed.
So even
It's
non-living beings.
everything. It's emptiness as well. That's probably the best description of the Great Wisdom Heart Sutra, because Buddha nature is non-conceptual. So the problem with trying to define it conceptually is that we run into, again, filling up the elephant. Right? And that's why I said at the beginning, the title of this talk is much ado about nothing. we're feeling the elephant, right? All views of that I have proposed to you today have been proposed since the dawn of Buddhism till now. They're all right and they're all wrong. Why? Because it's one way of looking at the elephant. It's not the elephant in itself. So that's why the Yogacara school looks at it and says, well, it cannot be grasped. It just can't. It cannot be grasped by the unenlightened mind. You have to experience it for yourself.
So when those sort of positive words are used to describe it, it's from people's experience of it.
It's from people's experience. They're trying to describe it, and inevitably they're going to fail, because people say, well, how come you can talk about, bliss, the nirvana is bliss. Well, it's a bliss unlike any bliss that human beings are experiencing conventionally. For example, sorry to use this example, but when you eat ice cream, right, you experience bliss. Huh? Is that bliss the same as having an orgasm? It's not. It's still different bliss, right? It's not the same bliss, right? But it's inevitably bliss, right? So how do you describe something that conventionally, people don't experience, but you use the term bliss, you use those terminologies, and people read it like they think they know what it is, but they don't. Okay? And this is the reason this is the failing of language. Sorry, I use the analogy, but it's so different, right?
wanted to kind of follow up with what Patricia was saying with her first question. And I really appreciated that question, Patricia, because I think that's something that many of us will bump into, this struggling for the whys and things. And I think often in times, Zen really, encourages us to use our inquisitive mind to kind of keep digging at something and, keep, questioning something. And usually when we keep questioning something outside of Zen, it's so that we can find the why, that we can find, why something is the way it is. And I don't know, Harriet, maybe you could comment on this a little bit more, but as we practice more, Zen helps us let go of our why more. And like, just to say, to accept that there isn't a why. Because I think a lot of us at the beginning come to practice, especially, I know I did, and I still do sometimes, looking for meaning in things. Why is this the way it is? Or why did this thing happen to me? Or looking for meaning. And I know we've talked about this before, Lotus, the letting go of because that becomes another desire, another grasping.
It's another obstacle.
Right. And so it's really, I find sometimes I'm still challenged by that. And that, Patricia, that's why I really appreciated that question about, and then I think people too often come to spiritual practices looking for meaning, looking for whys, looking for these deep, fundamental questions that we have into the nature of reality and what it means to be human. But at the end, there's just the ice cream, maybe.
And the
I did
bliss
take
of,
your second analogy.
bliss of nirvana. The bliss of nirvana.
Yes, but,
But you gotta taste the bliss of nirvana to know what I'm talking about, right? So it's not the same as the ice cream or the orgasm.
I'm not there. But do you hear my? I guess that's kind of what I'm like. Ultimately, nirvana would be really like letting go of the why. You're not going to get farther until you can. Yeah,
That's really helpful to Violet. Thanks for those comments. Yeah. I guess we often think that spiritual pursuits are asking why. Like I think conventionally that's what people usually do. Spiritual pursuits, you want to know like why.
we all want to think that this, we want to feel like our lives have meaning.
Mhm.
For that there is a purpose, something difficult happens or something great happens, and we think, oh, that's why that happened, or that's what was supposed to happen, or this is the reason this is that way. And it gives
Don't worry about it. A lot of Buddhist practitioners and scholars get into the same problem. They're trying to explain
hard
why.
to let go of. Like, and then there's not a lot of encouragement outside of this, even in like there's not a lot of encouragement to let go of our whys.
I was sick last week. That's why I was not at the sitting. I was sick for 3 days, and my sister called me and she says, she asked me how I'm doing. I said, well, my joints are all inflamed. I've got inflammation in my body. It feels like rheumatoid arthritis. I'm in pain. I'm in bed all day Saturday. And she's like, oh, because you got bad karma. Because you do more, charity work and do more generosity. And I looked at her and I listened to her and I laughed. I just started laughing. I said, you're kidding, right? You find me a human being who doesn't ever experience sickness. Are you going to tell me that everybody has bad karma? You told me a living being that's never experienced illness, including, my dog and cats and everybody. Huh? It's a bad thing. Yeah, it's unpleasant, but to experience. But it's not a bad thing. It's a thing that happens to everybody. Okay, it's just the condition of how things are. Hmm? We put all these values, these ideals, these kind of meaning onto our experiences. And it makes it worse. Even my sister, who's grown up in Buddhism, well, she doesn't practice as much as, learn and listen to a lot of Dharma talks. She doesn't understand. So unless you practice, you wouldn't see through all of, the wrong ways of looking at life. All the wrong ways we distort life, distort experiences to create our own suffering. Now, if I believe what my sister said, I have bad karmas. Exactly like the Catholic original sin. Guess where that's gonna take you? Psychologically, where's that gonna take you? So there's a lot of misperception and misunderstanding of Buddhism, even among Buddhist scholars and teachers and practitioners. When you're working with Zen, you're looking at the purest form, like stripped down version of Buddhism. Okay? The experience itself with none of the attachments, with other stuff to attract people. It doesn't appeal to a lot of people. I just had the very talk with Zen nun in Hamilton yesterday. I said Zen practice doesn't appeal to a lot of people. It doesn't work with the general population. She says, yes, I agree with you because I teach them Vipassana and mindfulness. And I know they're not doing mindfulness. I teach them nevertheless because it helps alleviate the anxiety, the suffering a little bit. A little bit. But if you want to devote to the end of suffering, that's the path of Zen. Really dedicated practitioners. I know. Thanks for that comment, Kyla. That's very good. Been a long time since I asked the why, so I don't really. It's hard for me to. I feel like it's hard for me to relate to a lot of new practitioners because it's been a long time since I asked these things. So these questions are very relevant, and it's important to have new practitioners to raise the awareness that the rest of the world is living like this. It's engaging in this. I've been practicing Zen for a long time, and I forgot what it's like to experience acute suffering. I forgot what it's like to be engaged in this whirl of continuous grasping. And that's why we produce Zen teachers who's just awakened, so they're close enough with the suffering. So they can relate and teach the suffering. Right? So a lot of people ask me, just like what I asked my teacher, hey, I didn't know very much. How the hell am I going to teach? He says, just teach. Why? Because if you become so advanced and, further on the path, none of these matters to you. You don't experience reality the same way as everybody else. So sometimes I feel a little bit, kind of far away from the new practitioners. But a lot of your questions will bring up for me what my previous experience in the first 10 years of practicing Zen was. And that's why I feel it's really important to instigate new teachers. So they're fresh from suffering. They can relate to the students more. Okay? That's just one of my views. Maybe I'm grasping. Carol, have any input?
No, I'm kind of overwhelmed. My brain is with everything that's gone on this week. I'm kind of just kind of listening and trying to take it all in. I'm kind of wondering about the reading part. I do the sitting, but I don't do a lot of reading. Do I just leave that for now, or?
I think the most helpful reading is Sunjun Suzuki's a book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind.
Okay.
That's probably the most helpful readings for beginners.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of questioning and thinking because of the situation of not being able to control what was going on. So sitting with that and the anxiety, everything, I'm still way at the beginning here. So, but it's helped. So
That book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, will help you.
yeah,
It's very helpful for beginners practitioner. I know it helped me a lot when I first started.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Carol, are you in Regina?
Yes, they do.
Yeah, if I have a copy of Zen Bind Beginner's Mind if you'd like to borrow it.
Sure, that would be great.
Yeah, maybe just send me an address or you can pick it up from my mailbox sometime and you can borrow it if that speaks to you. Yeah, let me know.
And that's why I wanted to start a mini library for our Sangha. Joseph has volunteered to be the librarian.
Right. I'm about to become technically literate.
As soon as he said, "Oh, I've got about 500 books on Buddhism," he's like, "Oh!" Well, 100, probably 100, 150 of that is in Vietnamese. So we're left with probably about 350 or 400 books in English. There's not a lot of books in Buddhism in English that I find is of value to actually add to the library. I mean, there's a lot of books on Amazon that's less than $50 that you can purchase, writing from different Buddhist teachers and things like that. On it's just the different ways of looking at things, but the fundamental kind of learning of Buddhism systematically is more academic, and that's what I was exposed to. and I wanted to put that out there onto the our library of some Zen books and Buddhist books. But I also want to give people a good map so they're not confused, because there's a lot of Buddhist practice out there. There's Tibetans, there's Theravadan, there's Zen, and there's different branches of Zen. I want people to be able to appreciate the differences between them, and also to have pretty much a good, complete map. So, you know which part of the map you're practicing, and how different schools approach things differently. So I don't want people to kind of throws and mix and match too many different types of practices together, because it's not helpful. If you're going to do something well, you do one thing well, right? And this is the problem with a lot of modern practice in the West, is that people are just grabbing everything from everything. Just smorgasbord of all different methods. And what I find in Vietnam was the same thing. But Buddhism in Vietnam has been there for a much longer time, because Vietnam is not the same culture as Japanese. So Vietnam basically just kind of have everything overlaps with everything. And after a while, you get no expert at anything. Right? So that's one of the dangers. So if you're going to theoretically, knowledge-wise, you can explore different practices. Ultimately, you got to choose the practice one and focus on that. But you're welcome to read and open your knowledge, because all roads lead to Rome. Eventually, they all lead to the same place. Just different ways of approaching it. Like this talk today, not to do about nothing. Right? Okay. Any other questions? Let's read the 4 Zen vows and dedicate the merits. Kyla can do that. Now you've got the Zen vows memorized by heart.
Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to liberate them all. Attachments are endless. I vow to uproot them all. Dharma gates are infinite. I vow to learn them all. The Buddha's way is supreme. I vow to realize it. We share our merits equally with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings find the Buddha way and be liberated.
So I hope you get on your cushion and practice. Good to see you again. Feels like a century being away for 2 weeks.